Hey, welcome to Skeptical Scott and Friends, a podcast for heathens. Please join us as we continue our book study. Last time, we began a review of More Than a Carpenter by Josh McDowell, which was updated with the help of his son, Sean. Some of us likely read it when we were young fledgling Christians or maybe in a small group. We may even have been gifted the book by another believer, such as what happened to me 30 years ago. We made it through the first half of the book during part 1. This is part 2. Josh tried to make a case that the New Testament is reliable in chapter 5. Then he posed the question, why would the apostles die for a lie in chapter 6? So now we are at chapter 7. What good is a dead Messiah? Josh writes that people were waiting everywhere for a promised deliverer, a king, not a martyr, that the apostles' hopes had initially died on the cross. A few weeks later, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 5, Jesus was seen by Peter and then by the 12 apostles. I wonder more about them not seeing him in the tomb. Might there be another explanation? The resurrection details vary among Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John already. Might the details about an empty tomb be a little fuzzy as well? Josh writes that after the resurrection, quote, they testified not only with their lips and lives, but also their deaths. Did they? As Josh and his son Sean acknowledge in this updated version, many die for their beliefs, such as the Buddhists, who set themselves on fire in the 60s. But again, I'm going to ask, did the apostles die for their God? It's not historically proven that all, or even most, of the apostles died for their beliefs. Earliest sources come from the late 1st or early 2nd century. Peter and Paul were likely martyred, but the details of that are even uncertain. James's death is briefly recorded in Acts chapter 12, verse 2, as King Herod Agrippa I saying that he, quote, killed James with the sword, unquote, which could mean a beheading. This was probably around 44 CE, but again, these are not legendary details, and it's not known if he truly died for his beliefs. The rest have weak or late evidence, and the details become more embellished and legendary over time. Though I will say, John's death doesn't seem so legendary. Tradition says he died of old age. Chapter 8. Did you hear what happened to Saul? Josh writes that Paul was vehemently anti-Christian because of his devotion to Jewish law. This new sect of Judaism, calling themselves Christians, struck at the essence of Paul's rabbinic studies. Straying from the law would bring God's wrath. So Paul wanted to exterminate the new movement, as it says in Galatians chapter 1. He began destroying the church, pursuing Christians, putting them to death, and on the way to Damascus, most of us have likely heard he had this conversion, a light from heaven. Saul, why are you persecuting me? Paul was blind for 3 days from the light. The other men that were there were speechless because they heard the voice, but they could not see the light. Paul finds Ananias because God said he was going to be there. And Ananias lays hands on Saul, who was filled with the Holy Spirit, and scales fell from Saul's eyes. So now he's no longer blind, and he was baptized. New Testament scholar Mike Licona writes, quote, today, we might believe that Jesus arose from the dead based on secondary evidence, trusting Paul and the disciples. But for Paul, his experience came from primary evidence. Bruh. Oh my glob, this smells funny. To throw in the term primary evidence when it's still in the Bible. Anyway, for those who say he hallucinated this whole thing, Josh says, nah, I don't think so. His life was transformed. It was transformed in a few ways. Number one, It transformed Paul's character, that God exposed his corruption, that his mind was clarified from this big revelation. Why is that a big deal? To realize, shit, I've been an asshole. 2, this experience transformed Paul's relationship with followers of Jesus, because now those followers were no longer afraid of him. Well, duh. If he said he converted to Christianity, why would they? 3rd, that this event transformed Paul's message, that Paul still loved Jewish heritage, but he went from being a bitter antagonist to a determined protagonist of the Christian faith. Again, duh. He now understood Jesus Christ's death on the cross, not as a curse from God, but as God reconciling the world to himself through Christ. In other words, atonement. I will never understand how Christ dying somehow pays for everybody's sins. Well, except for the sin of not buying supernatural stories. For that, it's eternal fire. That's another show. The 4th way, this was a transformation, not a hallucination. It transformed Paul's mission from the Jewish radical to missionary to non-Jews. That he was willing to suffer, such as being beaten in jail, the danger in the wilderness, etc. You can look that up in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And that eventually Paul/Saul died as a martyr, according to early church history. As we've covered, there are many who are willing to die as a martyr for their beliefs. Tradition says he was beheaded by King Nero, though there were not eyewitnesses to that. But let's just give them all of that. Let's say Paul's life changed and he was beheaded for his beliefs. How does this prove the Jesus story? All it proves is that his life and his decided purpose changed. And now a quick story from Josh that he thinks is compelling. He tells of a story of sitting with a history major at the University of Houston who claimed there wasn't evidence for Christianity. A student had read a chapter describing the life of Saul of Tarsus and ended up describing the life of Paul the Apostle, and that his Roman history book was unclear on why that would be. John showed him the book of Acts and explained Christ's post-resurrection appearance to Paul. The student concluded the most logical explanation for Paul's radical change to Saul was finding this missing piece. Quote, later he became a Christian, unquote. And that was enough evidence for this logical conclusion. Are they just trying to use words like logical and primary evidence, etc.? And then later, Archibald McBride, professor at the University of Aberdeen, he writes of Paul, quote, the achievements of Alexander the Great and Napoleon pale into insignificance, unquote. Bruh. Come on now. It's comical that finding out why Paul's name changed to Saul ended up being the key link for the student to become a Christian. The truth is, this student stumbled on a common traditional practice among many cultures, from the Native Americans to Buddhists, Hindus, and the clergy and Catholicism like Pope Francis, and that's renaming. This usually is something like an initiation into a new role, religion, or identity. Then Josh writes that Lord George Littleton, who had been determined to destroy the basis of Christian faith, did a complete turnaround himself. Quote, if Paul's conversion was true, then Jesus Christ rose from the dead. For everything Paul was and did, he attributed to his witnessing the risen Christ, unquote. Wow. Lord George puts it all on Paul's conversion as proof. I wonder what would make Paul's conversion story untrue. Also, would a renaming be enough proof for the resurrection of Lazarus, or the young daughter of Jairus, or the widow's son at Nain, or Tabitha, or Eutychus, who fell from a window to his death during one of Paul's long sermons? I think people forget that Jesus was not the only one resurrected in the Bible. There were many more, including multiple dead people rising from their graves like zombies and appearing in Jerusalem, according to Matthew. So let's just end this chapter with a simple question. Why did God appear to Paul? But apparently, he cannot appear to us today. And those testimonies of multiple other dead people resurrecting, those kind of miracles, isn't it funny how the amount of miracles that people claim to have seen suddenly drops with the invention of the video camera? Chapter 9. Can you keep a good man down? Josh says that after 700 hours of studying, he was unable to explain away the fact that the resurrection of Jesus Christ was a real event in history. The way he puts it, quote, "It's either one of the most wicked, vicious, heartless hoaxes ever foisted on humanity, or it's the most important fact in history," unquote. He sure loves using false dichotomies. Can I offer at least one other choice? Could it be a story that grew legs and people continued to add on bullshit? Rumors don't always start as heartless, wicked, and vicious. They usually grow into that. Josh then tries to explain the significance and, in his mind, accuracy of the empty tomb. Quote, "A Roman guard of strictly disciplined men was stationed to watch the tomb. Fear of punishment among these men produced flawless attention to duty, especially in the night watches. This guard affixed on the tomb the Roman seal, a stamp of Roman power and authority. The seal was meant to prevent vandalism. Anyone trying to move the stone from the tomb's entrance would have broken the seal and thus incurred the wrath of Roman law. Yet in spite of the guard and the seal, the tomb was empty," unquote. Yet Josh, it's not that clear. Rather than show the differences in the stories between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he sets up bowling pins to knock down by bringing up several alternative theories that skeptics have brought up. Alternative theory 1, the wrong tomb theory, that the Roman guards were accidentally guarding the wrong one. Josh says if this was true, then Roman guards would have lost no time in producing the body from the correct tomb. I say that assumes that there was a tomb in the first place. In fact, I've read before that tombs were usually reserved for people who were wealthy. Was Jesus wealthy? 2, the hallucination theory, that people just hallucinated all of this. Hallucinations are individual, but there's scant evidence for a group hallucination, according to Josh, because Jesus Christ appeared to many. No, Jesus Christ was said to have appeared to 500 witnesses post-resurrection in 1 Corinthians. Do you at least find it a little funny that it was exactly 500? I mean, what if it was 501? That one person probably would feel pretty left out. Hey, what are the names of those witnesses? Alternative theory 3, the swoon theory, that Jesus Christ didn't die. He fainted. Then he was resuscitated, not resurrected. I think Josh just included this theory to make the opposition sound silly. The 4th alternative theory, the stolen body theory, that the disciples stole the body. But how to get by the guards and go from distraught to suddenly brave? Testimony rooted in lies would not lead to themselves being beaten and imprisoned, etc. Again, Josh assumes there was a tomb. He assumes there was a guard. Testimony, whether rooted in lies or not, can become real when it's repeated enough and can lead to dying for it. Some would rather be right and die than be wrong. The 5th alternative theory, the lost tomb of Jesus, that Jesus was actually reburied in a family tomb 5 kilometers south. This would contradict the Gospels. And after all, the family of Jesus was not wealthy. Josh just says this is sensationalist. What sounds more sensationalist? That the family moved the body, or that a murdered preacher pressed the undo button on death and floated into legend? The 6th alternative theory, the copycat theory, that there are parallels with other dying and rising gods like Osiris, Mithras, Adonis, Dionysus. Josh just dismisses these by writing, quote, differences between Christianity and the mystery religions are far more profound than the similarities, unquote. These alternative theories are not very serious in their disagreement. These were easy for Josh to put out there so he can say, look, I've studied the other options. But Josh, there are many more theories, including that this whole story is made out of whole cloth. And no, I'm not suggesting the debunked Shroud of Turin. Josh, why not bring up the disagreements between the Gospels themselves?
We think it's real important to question what you know. So before you leave the podcast, it's the skeptic of the show.
The following clip was used in season 1 a long time ago, but I just got to use it again for a few reasons. 1, I have a lot of new listeners this season. 2, it directly addresses this topic. And 3, it comes from ex-pastor Dan Barker, co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I can't wait to meet him at the BajaCon conference in Sarnia, Ontario this August. Here we go.
Let me ask you, there's 4 or 5 accounts of the resurrection in the New Testament. The New Testament gives contradictory answers to all of these questions. What time did the women visit the tomb? Was the sun shining or was it dark? Take your pick. Who were the women? Different lists. What was their purpose? Different purposes. Was the tomb open when they arrived? What do you think? Yes or no? Both. In Matthew, the tomb was closed and it opened after the angel came in the earthquake. Who was at the tomb? Different accounts. Where were these messengers situated? Different accounts. What did the messengers say? Different accounts. Did the women tell what happened? Yes and no. When Mary returned from the tomb, did she know Jesus had been resurrected? Yes and no. When did Mary first see Jesus? Could Jesus be touched after the resurrection? After the women, to whom did Jesus first appear? Different stories. Where did Jesus first appear to the disciples after the resurrection? Different stories. Matthew said it first happened in Galilee, which was 60 to 100 miles away. But John and the others say, no, it happened somewhere in the road to Emmaus or in Jerusalem. Did the disciples believe these men? What happened at the appearance? Did Jesus stay on earth for a while? You go through these things. They cannot be reconciled. No scholar, no Bible scholar has been able to write a coherent narrative to explain just basically what happened.
You can hear Dan Barker and his wife, Annie Laurie Gaylor, every Thursday on Free Thought Radio, which is consumable as an audio podcast as well. As Josh begins to wrap up this important chapter covering this central event, he name drops several people. British scholar Brooke Foss Westcott, divinity professor at Cambridge University, says, quote, taking all the evidence together, it is not too much to say that there is no historic incident better or more supported than the resurrection of Christ.
I want you to stop getting hysterical over nothing. Are you out of your mind? Are you nuts? I just told you, I think you're ridiculous.
Do you hear the extremes in that quote? No other historic incident. In fact, Josh's book is full of those extremes. Listeners, I bet you can think of multiple historical incidents that are better supported than the resurrection of Christ. Josh gives us a couple more quotes. Dr. William Lane Craig, quote, the most reasonable historical explanation for the facts of the empty tomb, the resurrection appearances, and the origin of the Christian way would therefore seem to be that Jesus rose from the dead, unquote. Really? Reasonable? Sir Lionel Luckhoo, knighted twice by Queen Elizabeth II, says, quote, I have spent more than 42 years as a defense trial lawyer. I have been fortunate to secure a number of successes in jury trials, and I can say unequivocally the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ is so overwhelming that it compels acceptance by proof, which leaves absolutely no room for doubt. Yet doubt remains. Besides, can we really trust a guy with a name like Sir Lionel Luckhoo? Josh ends this chapter with a plea to you and me that individual believers can experience the power of the risen Christ by 1, know your sins are forgiven, 2, that you are assured eternal life, and 3, that you can be released from a meaningless and empty life. And he presents that as fact. Josh, you're assuming that we mere atheists have a meaningless and empty life. Fuck that. As my friend Dave Warnock says, carpe the fucking diem. I don't need a Christ for that. I will answer instead what Mary Oliver asks. What will you do with your one wild and precious life? Chapter 10. Will the real Messiah please stand up? This is where Josh says that the life of Jesus fulfilled so many ancient prophecies. And he says these prophecies are not coincidental. So Josh brings in an author named Peter Stoner who wrote the book Science. According to Peter, the chances that we'd have any man who might have lived down to the present, who had fulfilled all of the 8 Old Testament prophecies that I'm about to say, he puts that probability at 1 in 100 quadrillion, also known as 1 in 10 to the 17th power. Here are the Old Testament prophecies. 1, that this Jesus would be born of a virgin. You know, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, in original Hebrew, it says young woman, not virgin. I mean, the translation to make it virgin is doing a lot of the theological heavy lifting here, wouldn't you say? Well, shoot, why not just use the probability stat here? Has any human ever been born of a virgin? That probability is 0. But let's see what else you have. 2, this Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. Micah chapter 5 verse 2 says that Jesus is from Nazareth, but we'll invent a census that no Roman historian mentions to walk him to Bethlehem to unlock this prophecy. The 3rd Old Testament prophecy that Jesus would be a descendant of David, that Jesus fulfills this lineage through Joseph. You know, the guy who is not his biological father. Is he an actual descendant of David then? 4, that this Jesus would have a ministry in Galilee. You know, I don't count a prophecy that says something important's going to happen where people live. I don't see that as divine foresight. The 5th Old Testament prophecy is that Jesus would perform miracles. You know, I'm curious. Would these be the same kind of miracles that were very common across many cultures during this biblical era? You know, from the Greeks and the Roman world to the Egyptians to the Eastern world, you know, all of these involving things like healings, divine appearances, resurrections, prophecies, exorcisms, wonders in the sky, let alone supernatural births. I wonder too if these miracles are the same type of ones we'd see today. You know, the ones that are very convenient and very unverifiable. I just saw a post where someone's tumor is said to have disappeared after a prayer with the congregation. I just can't help but think there was a guy in that congregation with a missing arm going, what the fuck? The 6th Old Testament prophecy that this Jesus would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. Is a paycheck a messianic prediction? The 7th Old Testament prophecy that this Jesus would be a suffering servant and would be despised and mocked and pierced, as it says in Isaiah 53. Well, according to Jewish scholars, this was about collective suffering servant, meaning Israel as a whole. Yet Israel's collective suffering gets recast as one man's execution. And then finally, Old Testament prophecy number 8, that this Jesus would be resurrected. According to Psalm 16, which reads, quote, God will protect me from death and ruin. I think this might be a song of trusting God in life, not a prophecy or an expectation of bodily resurrection. It is about God not letting one's life end in disgrace or destruction. But in the New Testament, Acts later reinterprets this Old Testament psalm as a prophecy after the belief in resurrection has already been established. Back to the author, Peter Stoner. Interesting last name. I mean, how else could you calculate the odds at being 1 in 10 to the 17th power? You know, the place after trillion. It seems to me that numbers sound impressive, but the calculation is dubious when you're not using an actual standard method of calculation. How do you have a controlled data set here? Why choose only these 8 prophecies? Did the other ones not fit? How does one multiply probabilities when the definitions, as we have seen, are quite fuzzy? There were a few more ideas in this chapter, but dang, it's a long chapter. I think we'll just leave it here. Let's start landing this plane. Chapter 11. Isn't there some other way? Josh excuses his God and says that God doesn't send people to hell. They go because of their own choices. I don't know if I can choose a belief. I'm either convinced or I'm not. And beliefs are largely determined by our upbringing, not as an invitation from an invisible deity. As for people who have never heard of Jesus, do they go to hell because of their choices? If they get a free pass for not knowing about him, then my advice is to shut the hell up. Don't endanger someone's eternity by introducing Jesus to them. They can't reject who they never met, right? So yeah, back to that question on the title, isn't there some other way? Josh's response to that question is, quote, "This attitude shows that many people simply don't understand the true nature of God and the depth of their own sin."
You're a fibber.
I'm a what?
Fibber.
Okay.
Liar.
Okay.
Yes. You sound like a fool.
I don't, because I know what I'm saying.
Are you trying to sound like a fool? You sound like a fool.
I'm trying to sound what it is.
You sound like a fool.
That's your opinion.
No, my opinion's the only one that counts.
I mean, honestly, I have...
No, I want you to be dishonest with me.
Baloney, Josh. This is kind of like the no true Scotsman fallacy. Only true Christians who understand the true nature of God can understand. Aren't there other claimed supernatural deities? Let me ask it this way. Why is it that in the research of near-death experiences, some Christians claim to see Jesus, but Sikhs, they report to see Waheguru, the divine? That those from native traditions, they see their ancestors or spirit guides. That Hindus see Yama, the god of death and justice and the underworld. And many people, including secular people, see a vague light. Could it be that near-death experiences align with the expectations in which we were brought up? Could it be that all of this, gods, ways to gods, angels, demons, the desire for an afterlife, and other supernatural ideas, could it be that God did not create man, but that man invented God? That this might just all be man-made up. The final chapter, chapter 12, He Changed My Life. Josh goes back to his college years when he said that his mind was made up, but that his will was reluctant because of pleasure and pride and partying in college. He thought it meant that he would have to give up the good life and give up control. And yet he still found himself not very happy. And so as he writes, quote, December 19th, 1959, at 8:30 p.m., as a sophomore in college, I became a Christian. Four things he prayed for, and I will summarize it in my own words to make it short. 1, thanks for dying for me, God. 2, I'm an asshole. Can you forgive me? 3, my heart's open and stuff. Cleanse me and make me who you want me to be. 4, thanks and stuff. Wasn't dramatic. It wasn't immediate, Josh says, but it was real. And that Josh was no longer restless and his temper was gone. And he forgave a guy named Wayne. So Josh's mom was gone a lot when he was young, and so Wayne would watch Josh. Josh was sexually assaulted by Wayne when he was young. And so at age 13, Josh then threatened Wayne that he would kill him if he was touched again. And so Wayne stopped. Later, Josh was able to talk with Wayne and forgive him. And he, quote, couldn't have done that on my own. Josh said he let go of hatred of his alcoholic father who had beat his mom, and he was able to tell his father that he loved him. His father wondered how Josh could say that he loved him. And then Josh told him about Jesus Christ, and Dad became a Christian and became sober. Quote, you can mock it, but it's true, and it works, unquote. Josh, congratulations. No, seriously, okay? Not being sarcastic. Congratulations on your life changes. Being able to forgive others. It sounds like you just needed to let some shit go, and I applaud that. I genuinely do, and I may understand more than you'd realize. I was able to make some important life changes too, including forgiving an adult who had taken advantage of me. It was a huge weight to let that shit go. And a deity was not part of that equation, but a secular therapist helped me big time. Josh, now I don't know about you, but I do know that many Christians discourage therapy in ways like saying that prayer or Bible study should be enough, or viewing depression and anxiety is mostly a spiritual problem, that taking medication shows a lack of faith, distrusting secular psychology. And I think it's important, whether you're religious or not, to be able to seek a therapist for support. So let me try. Therapy. You can mock it, but it's true, and it works. Josh then ends his testimony here, quote, in spite of the firmness of facts and the authenticity of experience, we're all free to make our own decisions. All I can do is tell you what I've learned. After that, what you do is up to you. Is it up to me, Josh? Or is it up to God? I mean, doesn't God already know? I don't think people choose to believe. It's not really up to me. I'm either convinced or I'm not. You said, in spite of the firmness of facts, which I think I've already addressed here, but you also said, in spite of the authenticity of experience. Now, I assume you mean the testimony of all the people you brought up, but I also think you mean your own that you just brought up. What about somebody else's authentic experience? One that includes a different God or no God at all. This book was about all of your personal experience. So who am I to question it? I've never met you, but let's look at your ultimate experience again. You were unhappy. You couldn't answer those core questions of who am I? Why am I here? You had an emotionally compelling reason for change. You flew overseas to Europe in college and stayed there for months to do some research. The research you poured into were mostly the resources of God believers and libraries and ancient religious buildings. How could you not be impacted by such an authentic experience when you were that young? Imagine spending all that time, over 700 hours of studying is what you said, all that time and energy and emotional labor to come back and say, hey guys, the answer was nope, I didn't find anything compelling for God. That experience and the joy others had hearing it, and the following book sales, of which you had no problem detailing on the book cover, put you right into the, what I call, the all God rhythm or algorithm. Your God glasses have been on ever since. So, to my friend who challenged me to read More Than a Carpenter again, thanks for the challenge. Rereading this book 30 years later with the eyes of a boomer, what do I see now? I see a collection of quotes, verses, stories, and the setting of a known earth with fictional supernatural layers. I don't want to hear Christians say, yeah, but the Bible says, no, the Bible doesn't say so. Humans wrote it, so humans say so. Sure, I suppose this all made Jesus more than a carpenter. But I'd say after reading the Bible front to back, studying it for decades, and rereading this book again, I'm bored with the carpenter. instead of a clear indicator on the presence of God. This all adds up to one giant snowball that's been rolled many, many times, of questionable evidence attached to it. It's a muddy snowball. It's picked up some brown stuff, and careful, it might not be mud. The snowball is not firm with facts, as you say, Josh, but is instead melting with weak evidence. Thanks for listening to Skeptical Scott and Friends. Find our link tree and more at skepticalscott.com. Have a question? Or are you interested in sharing a part of your questimony? Email me at heyskepticalscott@gmail.com. Drop the supernatural, embrace the rational, believe in as many true things as possible. See you at least every first and third Friday. May skeptical thoughts be with you. Cheers.